Welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday, a lectionary podcast from two out of the three clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. Reverend Elizabeth is on the first part of her sabbatical and will be back in Lent. I'm John Kennedy.
And I'm Peter Walsh.
And we are continuing through Jesus' Sermon on the Plain in Luke chapter 6. And here we get to what we could call the ethics of the kingdom. And they are both perhaps the simplest teachings of Jesus, but also the hardest. So let's get into it. Luke chapter 6, verses 27 to 38. But I say to you that listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you. And if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, to receive as much again. But love your enemies, do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back.
I'm super excited about this. This used to be a passage that I found so hard I didn't know what to do with, and now I've decided that it's easy. Easy to fail at, but easy. And I think it's about the most important passage that could land in our personal lives, in our country, and in the world today. I'm so excited about this. I just think it's fantastic. And I used to think it was kind of impractical. I think this is the most practical piece of scripture I can think of off the top of my head. And I used to think, oh my gosh, all this stuff about enemies and I'm losing my stuff, I'm going to give up my shirt. I now think this is like the most joyous thing I have ever heard. And that what we get here is, we got the Dharma of Jesus, right? This is the way, the teaching. And as you said at the outset, simple but profoundly difficult in so many ways. And it's a radical call to a different way of living. And it exposes the human heart. It exposes our culture. It's the imitation of Christ. It's the imitation of God. And if you go for it, it's super joyous because then you don't have to fight all the time. You don't have to be miserable all the time. It unwires all the stuff that's wired into us that really has us like this all the time. And when you put that down, it just opens the gate to joy upon joy in divine communion. I think this is phenomenal.
Agreed. I think we can stop there. That was beautiful. I thought of a couple things when I was reading this and thinking about it and reading about it. And one is the Dalai Lama's teaching. I didn't actually go back and look it up, so my paraphrase might be a little hackneyed. Pardon me if that's the case. But he talks about wise selfishness, that if you truly understand what is your good, what is good for you, what will actually make you joyful and free, it looks like this. It looks like profound selflessness. It looks self-sacrificial. It looks self-forgetting, and it is. Our language about self and what is good for us and so on is kind of funny and multi-layered, but in a very, very real and the most real way, if we really understand, if we really perceive what is in our best interest, we'll end up doing this. We'll end up letting go, living in this open-handed, open-hearted sort of way that looks like we aren't looking out for ourselves at all, but actually at the deepest, truest level we are.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up and brought that in. Yes to what you say, and yes to what His Holiness has to say, and yes to the holiness of our Lord. For Jesus lived this way. I mean, He's talking about the way He lived. He prays for those who crucified Him, right? And He embodied this. And in this, He, broke the cycle of violence, was seeking to break the cycle of violence that just absorbs so much of our culture, but it absorbs us too. And so by putting that down, oh my gosh, there is so much room and space for love.
Yes.
And love is the most joyous and enlightening, literally makes you lighter if you enter into this. And it's the exact opposite of television in, the news cycle of America.
Yeah.
That gets pumped into our, into our beings all the time.
Yeah, it's poisonous. I mean, Thich Nhat Hanh, I guess I'm on a Buddhist roll today, the great Vietnamese Zen master, said in his teaching on, the Buddha's teaching on sort of right or skillful consumption or diet, that this isn't narrowly about what we put in our mouths, the food and drink and so on, whether it's healthy or intoxicating or so on, because obviously Buddhist teaching is traditionally sort of frowns on that sort of stuff.
Sure.
But also like what goes in through our eyes and like what we consume in basically like entertainment and culture and media. This is part of our diet too. And I would say the standard American diet, not just in the sense of food, but in the sense of our media, is poisonous, is toxic. And yet we identify with it, we cling to it, we seek entertainment and release and all of this stuff from it that only keeps us hooked in this cycle that has its ups and downs. So sometimes it feels kind of good,
Yeah.
but then it just lets us down again, it brings us down again. And something quite radical is needed, a radical prescription, a radical treatment from our divine physician is needed to liberate us from it. There's this great line from probably my favorite show, except for maybe Twin Peaks by the late David Lynch, but my other favorite show, Mad Men. One of these characters who's like an ad executive in the 60s and like trying, like everybody else, trying to find happiness. It's kind of a show about unhappy people selling happiness. And he has this moment of self-awareness, and he realizes that all this stuff he was trying to do to fix himself, to fix how he feels, was just a temporary bandage on a permanent wound. So our divine physician gives us a more radical prescription. It looks like this.
Oh, John, wow.
Quick fixes and so on are not.
Yeah,
not
really, really interesting. And we're going to go in a little bit right into some of the particulars of what is there. But if you don't mind, and if all of you listening don't mind, I just, as I mentioned to you in my office for just a moment last night, I stumbled for a moment on an article, and then I read most of it this morning. And I found it incredibly enlightening. And if I could just share a little bit of the piece and parts of it. It's called The Gravity of Groups. And it's an article about a woman, a professor named Amina Chikara, who probes the roots of social antagonism. And this is something she's been studying for 2 decades. And she has this hypothesis, which is that, there's a fundamental social force that sets groups of people against each other. Hardwired to work in teams, humans assess whether other groups could pose a threat and respond accordingly. And then operating in consort with allies, she noticed, could make people abandon their own personal morality. And she speaks about how we are changed when the individual moves to the collective, and the groups have baked within them a matter of us versus them. And she notes that behavior differs depending on whether people believe they are operating on an individual level or a group level. No longer was, she's talking about somebody in particular, interacting as one person. He was speaking to the whole group and for the whole group, representing his alliance, and that this group affiliation changes how humans act toward each other. And when people think tribally, they naturally start to dislike members of the opposing faction. And she's talking about more polarized America and hostility in our contemporary rhetoric, and she notes that tribal conflict detracts from the operation of politics and governance, and perceiving those with other perspectives as fundamentally different beings who deserve to be crushed. And we see this in our country and certainly in the Israel-Palestinian conflict. And she notes also that such political factions are formed not by policy positions rather than solidified by hatred of the other. And Americans hate their political opponents more than they like their political allies. This is a new phenomenon in the last decade. And Americans overestimate how much their political foes hate them. So they're solidified by the suspicion that the opponent harbors ill will. And rival partisans get locked in a spiral of assuming the opponent hates them and ramping up their own animosity in turn.
Wow.
Wowzer. and into that comes the doctor.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And just to how hardwired this is into us as human beings, so much of Jesus's teaching was in total continuity with his tradition and his scriptures. But this, I think, is not. I think this is something new. So Jesus quotes the golden rule here, which is first found in Leviticus 19, verse 18, chapter 19, verse 18. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. But I think the sense of that was your neighbor is your countryman, your tribesman, however defined.
Fellow people of the covenant here, followers of the law.
And whoever, because there is this hospitality to the alien and to the immigrant. So whoever sort of comes among you as your people, but not necessarily like the Babylonians or something
right,
like
well,
that.
that's what the Good Samaritan's about.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And so we find this sort of sentiment in the Psalms, for instance. I love the Psalms. I'll stick up for the Psalms any day to anybody. But we do find this sensibility of, for example, in Psalm 139, which says, do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with perfect hatred. I count them my enemies. And this is like a prayer. This is an expression of piety. And in more contemporary to Jesus, among the Dead Sea Scrolls community, the Qumran community, their community rule lists some qualities of like the master, which is some sort of community leader. We don't need to get into that. But it says, among them is everlasting hatred for the men of perdition, basically for enemies.
Wow, interesting.
That's a virtue around Jesus' time in a
Yes.
different Jewish community.
Yeah.
So that's not to say that Judaism before Jesus or apart from Jesus is monolithic on that at all. But that definitely was an accepted and even, promoted value. And Jesus is teaching something very different here. He's showing us something very different.
Very
here.
different,
Yeah.
very different. And I think, John, thank you for that. And those are great examples. The one from the Essenes in Qumran is, I probably have heard in the past, but it's like, oh. I think one of the things that's particularly interesting here is that Jesus is shape-shifting certain things here. One of the things that we see here is as Jesus change and shape-shifts his tradition with different emphasis and new pieces. We see that when he says, be merciful as your Father is merciful here. And in the Hebrew scriptures, we get really be holy as your Father, as God is holy. And so holiness in that Hebrew tradition involves separation and distancing from the sinners, from the unholy. And here Jesus with love your enemies and even the do good, do as you wish others to do to you, and that's others and not. That's wide open, not just your fellow countrymen and women, but that now it is an everybody thing, and he collapses holiness into this, bringing this together rather than separating this out.
That's right. Yeah, beautiful and very profound. And I remember we talked about this in the podcasts last year on Jesus' high priestly prayer in John, where he's talking about, the holiness of God and the glory of God. But he's talking about it in terms of love. And there's this really interesting dynamic of the people of Jesus, the disciples gathered in that room, and obviously all of us throughout time who are Jesus' people. We are to be defined by love, like this sort of universal divine love, which, as Matthew says, sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous, is merciful, right? That's an interesting sort of conflation of Matthew and Luke I just did, but I think they're of the same mind there, despite some different language and images. But we're to be defined by that kind of love, a love that knows no bounds. But precisely because of that, we are set apart and distinct from the world, because even though God loves the world in that way, the world of humanity, the world of sort of human ego consciousness and all of its devices and so on and its imaginings, it doesn't really live according to that kind of love. And so this sort of holiness sort of retains the traditional sense of holiness as set apart, but in a very different way. We're set apart precisely because we love all.
Yes, that's super exciting to hear you talk about that, John. I think one of the things I love about this piece is that this is grounded in the being of God. I don't think we talk enough about the being of God. And when we die and come closer into the sense of the being of God, we're going to think, wow, what the heck were we doing rearranging these chairs here? We missed that we were on the boat. And that the boat is the divine being. And that the being of God, as John says, God is love. And if you go through the Johannine thing, you get light, life, and love. This is the being of God. And out of the being of God comes this mercy. This is what you get out of the being of God. Mm-hmm. And that what Jesus is talking about here and the way that Luke organizes it, it's to say this is the imitatio of God.
Yes,
you want to imitate God, but it's imitatio of Christ because, well, that's exactly how Jesus did it. And so if you imitate Jesus, who's imitating God, you're in the divine flow of the divine being.
Yeah.
You're acting like the divine being. And this is what makes you so-called children of the Most High.
Yes.
And this is when we are aligned. We were created in love and for love. This is the image of God is. Mm-hmm. This is to live in the image of God.
Yes.
And he's explained to us how to live in the image of God. And it says, love your enemies.
Yeah.
That's how you live in the image of God.
Yeah. 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 I mean, Thomas Merton wrote, so many people have written about this, how much depends on our idea of God. And I mean, you talked about this recently, dour Christianity being one of your pet peeves. But if we have like an operative image of God, a lot about, and we really believe in it, and it really animates us, a lot about how we live and our attitudes about ourselves and about what's, ethical or good conduct, our attitudes towards other people, how we view other people, all of that kind of flows from that. So this is grounded in the being of God. It's really a beautiful thing. It's not as if Jesus is just giving us a new sort of checklist at which we could like just do in a mechanical sort of way where it's like, oh, I really didn't want to be nice to that person who is, my enemy in whatever way. But I did it. So, check that off and I can feel good about myself. No, this is a totally different, totally different paradigm. Jesus is saying, look at who God is and live accordingly. It does mean like actually doing certain things and living in a certain way. There's an eschatological component to this too that I think is worth flagging and I think we should return to, but that it should be pursued and it can be lived out in this life, in this era, in this age of salvation history and so on. But it should be sort of an organic flowing forth from our connection to this God of love.
Yeah, this is a very high-level teaching on that level that you're talking about. This is about the disposition of the heart, rather than just how am I going to do every little thing. I mean, you can't do every piece of this. It's just not going to happen. But if your disposition of your heart is to be there, it's amazing the benefits that you receive.
Yeah.
And what you were talking about, His Holiness at the beginning, saying this is actually, to be selfish is actually to live like this. Mm-hmm. And because I think what it does, if you live like this, it increases your capacity for light, life, and love. And that's a super joyous thing. Great book here, folks, by a mutual friend of ours, Stephen Post, who runs the Institute for the Study of Love, and formerly of St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Cleveland Heights. And Stephen has done incredible work, and he wrote a book called Why Good Things Happen to Good People. And I just want to talk about two sentences. This is in the preface. The first sentence of the preface is, love is the most radical, life-altering force in the universe. And then the first line of chapter 1 is, if I could take one word with me into eternity, it would be give. And what the book is about is the study of why good things happen to good people. And then he goes through 10 things that happen to good people, and they're all phenomenal. And what he's saying is you can take this high-level love thing, and if you turn around and give, well, then you start to get the benefits. I mean, over and over, I used to come up and say, what are the studies around the efficaciousness of praying for other people? And he'd say, well, that's very hard to, lay out exactly how that works, but we certainly know those who pray for others receive benefit. So that's what Jesus is saying here. I mean, that whole thing at the bottom about giving, love and give.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's something very real here, not just metaphorical, about the frequency that we sort of plug into and live on and exist on, being really important. And if we sort of plug into the divine frequency, which isn't really just a frequency, it's like sort of, the ground of being, its ultimate reality, we are aligned with, I think the alignment language is really good, and plugged into life, as you said, capital L, life. And I think this is Athanasius of Alexandria, but one of the Eastern church fathers had this beautiful image or way of sort of reading the creation story and the fall story, obviously in the early chapters of Genesis, as being a matter of human beings, that is in the story, Adam and Eve, being created in a state of communion with their creator, who is life, immortal, imperishable, like, brilliant divine life and light. And the fall is sort of, this is using a more modern, relative to that time, image, but it's sort of like they unplugged. Right. And so we die. Obviously in the patristic period and in the ancient period, they had a different understanding of like the history of the world and didn't have concepts like evolution and so on, so they didn't know all the biology we know. But I think they basically thought that physical death entered the world because of this estrangement, because of the separation. And I think there's something very important to take from that, even if we might question the literal truth of that idea, which is we come alive, literally, when we're plugged in and living this way. We're plugged into our Lord, our source, the divine ground and the divine being. And our life just expands, and it has a rippling effect. Life flows forth from us to the extent that we are living this way, and touches others, and others are enlivened. And that's what a good church community is. That's what St. Mark's is at its best. You said in your annual address during the day of the annual meeting the other day that we're like a sort of theophany, a manifestation of God. And that's real. So like beautiful how that's confirmed by data and sort of the tools and the perspectives of our modern sort of scientific paradigms.
Yeah. So super cool. You move from data from the Garden of Eden to the word data.
Right.
Love that.
Right.
Love that. Just one other thing before we go. I just want to touch on it because I find this to be one of these other things that Jesus says, and it's been a major issue, a major thing that I've spent a lot of time with in the last year and a half, which is do not judge. And obviously you have to judge. I was noting that you have to judge, particularly when you're driving. Like, should you take a left turn across traffic, which is what I had to do this morning. I'm going, well, I'm judging because I can go, as I pulled into the parking lot. So we judge all the time. That's what the human brain does. That's what our energy systems do when they got in front of us. But just talking about a different thing, and maybe two different things. And is do not judge mean, what does it apply to? And when I was in India, I was walking through, we had been with us, my friends Chris and Jackie, and we were at the Tashita Meditation Center. We walked out the back, and we're down. I swore we were lost in the woods, so Chris said he knew where we were going. And Chris, who is celebrated and awarded in the Church of South Africa for his lifelong stand with the marginalized. As we were walking down through these woods, he was wound up about something. I don't remember the particulars of it, but he was very upset about wealth being in the hands of so few, and that there were so many people starving and in the world, and all of the degradation that was happening. This could be fixed. And at a certain point I said to him, how do you square your disposition of your heart here with Jesus's command to do not judge? which is where I was spending a lot of time not judging. And Chris said, he said he believes that these are two different things. And I'll just pass on a brief of that, which is to say Jesus judged, right? And he judged it's called unrighteousness, that which was not the way of the divine, and that was crushing other beloved of the divine, other human beings, so to speak. And that is a judgment that leads to a certain calling out and a prophetic calling out and a certain action. And I think what Chris was saying to me is that's a different category of do not judge, and that the do not judge that we get here has particular connotations for forgiveness. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, you will not be condemned. Forgiven, you will be forgiven. That some of that's in the context of the question of forgiveness. And the more that you forgive, the more you receive forgiveness. It increases your capacity to forgive. The more you forgive, the more your capacity goes up. But that whatever it is, I would still say that I have had a much lighter go of it in life since I gave up judging everything and then saying that my judgment was a priori correct. Yeah. And I just said, I'm going to put that down. It's just incredibly freeing.
Yeah. Amen to that. And I love the tension that is inherent in that, kind of that exchange you had with Chris about not judging on the one hand, this desire to just almost like live and let live in a certain sense, if that seems to apply, but also like recognizing what looks like real injustice in the world and the suffering and the dehumanization and so on that results from that. And my sense of that is that Jesus is not talking here at all about refraining from judging what is clearly unjust. Like that this is about judging people, and that when it comes to, actions, human actions that result in marginalization and suffering, like we should recognize it and name it for what it is. I mean, that's certainly what Jesus did, and certainly what, his followers have done throughout time. I don't know. Does that seem right?
Yeah, that sounds good. And I'll just put a yes onto that. And I think what it does, there's a difference between doing that and then also letting go of it.
Yes,
and so you don't have to follow that with a I hate that dude.
That's right.
Right.
You can still love them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the difference, which is what you're doing is wrong, but and I'm not gonna be curdled in hatred for you.
That's right.
But I'm gonna wish you well and wish you thriving. Yeah. But what you're doing here doesn't work.
Martin Luther King is he so often is exemplary and really kind of revolutionary, not kind of, truly revolutionary, when he told people who were marching with him, like part of their training was to prepare to face. You went on this pilgrimage last year, so you know about this, and a lot of people know about this. But people who marched with him had to be trained in like the ways of nonviolent resistance. That is to actually have people who hate you and might actually hurt you right in your face, and to respond with love, to respond nonviolently. Incredible. You need to be trained in that. And he would say, like, if you're not prepared to love your enemies here, then sit this one out, because that's everything. So obviously they're calling out injustice, but doing it with love.
Okay, I know Rob's really dying to get us to be quiet because no one's watching anymore because we've talked too long. I just for folks who are, I have so much to say about that, and I won't go into it. But how was it? We were exposed to that on our civil rights pilgrimage. And if you're ever in Atlanta, don't miss the Human Rights Museum there, where you sit at a counter, put your hands and put headphones on, and feel what it was like to be in one of the sit-ins. I mean, it is truly petrifying. Yeah, truly petrifying.
Yeah. Thank you for tuning in and listening and being part of our conversation and part of our community. We always love hearing from you. So, leave a comment, like, and all that good stuff. And we will see you next time. Peace be with you.